3, 2, 1.
Okay, perfect. So we start. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, those in New York City, and good evening to those in Europe. We are in Italy, and welcome to the International Youth Conference Edition 8, to the panel entitled "Implementation of Human Rights in Public Management Instruments: Youth's Voice." During this panel, we want to analyze the importance of integrating human rights into public management. So we decided to schedule this panel because we want to recall that the international human rights framework, and so all the principles related, such as effective governance, transparency, responsiveness, rule of law, justice, all these principles should be the normative starting points. Starting point for government bodies in the design and implementation of program services, public services, and budget allocation, most of all. And this implementation should start with us, youth, because we have a crucial role in in the world of tomorrow, but also and most of all in today's world. So we have to cooperate in order to stand up for our rights and to make the government stick to them as well in their daily work schedule. So with this panel, we want to share promising concepts, tools, and practices for improving in embedding human rights into public governance at local, regional, national, European, and international level. Here we have advocates and activists coming from different fields but related, and who carry on their daily work at different levels. Because we at IYC think that applying a multi-level governance approach and building alliances at local, regional, national, European, and international levels is the only solution we have actually for giving an effective and concrete response to the challenges that we are all facing. So after having introduced in a general way, because we will have the chance to deepen the subject with our speaker, I would leave the floor to our speaker, who have many interesting, enriching, and experience-based points to share with us. So we are going to begin with Ashley Ravishi. Sorry for the pronunciation. Ashley currently serves as a member of the United Nations Association Ratified Steering Committee for the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Convention of the Rights of the Child. In 2020, she was honored with the Emerging Public Leader for the United Nations Agenda 2030 Award for her work in advocacy in the field of human rights and racial justice. She's a delegate to the UN Climate Conference of the Parties, COP26 and COP27, representing the League of Women Voters US. She participates in collaborative policymaking for local and national groups using data-driven solutions to address public safety, open governance, and human rights issues. So, Ashley, the floor is yours. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Maria. Welcome, fellow panelists and participants. Again, my name is Ashley Raviche, she, her, and I want to take a moment to share that I'm joining you virtually from the unceded lands of the coastal Miwok in Northern California. I would like to thank the organizers of the International Youth Conference for inviting me to speak today about the advocacy that I'm engaged with, which centers public management instruments in human rights. My goal today is to share what I've learned thinking globally, yet acting locally, in creating policy for local, state, national, and global actors. More specifically, I invite you to hear some of the lessons that I've learned in working in youth-led advocacy, as well as grassroots campaigns for racial justice, gender justice, and climate justice. Despite my gray hairs, I got my I started my journey in policymaking as a sexy youth advocate, just like you all. And I collaborated with Generation Citizen and the League of Women Voters, where I focused my leadership approach on uplifting marginalized voices and holding space for a more equitable and diverse participation. I served as the youngest board president for my organization, and I made it my mission to mentor someone younger than I because it's a matter of growing diversity, of creating inclusion, and creating belonging in making that part of the normative approach for organizations to operate, especially when they are engaged in policymaking. Um, this is a task that I felt very strongly connected to before it was part of the zeitgeist of grassroots movement making. So I've certainly aged into my role as a policymaker, but I continue to find great importance in seeking out and incorporating youth into leadership roles for grassroots movement campaigns. I'm really encouraged to see how this space has transformed into the global powerhouse of youth led advocates, activists, and I am eager to participate in all of your interventions. I am really humbled to be in community with you today. I want to take this down for a quick moment and acknowledge the greater urgency that youth have for engaging in civic participation and shaping public management instruments than my generation or generations before ever had. The climate crisis has created a landscape where your future is not on secure ground, and that uncertainty is deeply felt. The obstacles your generation faces are greater than our current global leadership is capable of solving, which is why your participation at the International Youth Conference is so critical. Keep mobilizing, keep building allyship, keep growing your capacity to achieve your goals. A few of the lessons that I learned in the importance of excuse me, is the importance of including storytelling and narratives, as well as centering the government instrument in those most impacted voices. Lastly, a critical nature of seeking an intersectional approach to human rights as the foundation from which to frame the policy and to shape that global dialogue on the issue. So let me take a moment and define what I mean by intersectional approaches as a way of level setting so you can understand how I use the approach. Intersectionality is the idea that recognizes each of us has a multitude of identities, and we take an intersectional approach, um, securing the understanding of where those identities intersect as a way of growing capacity and understanding the complexities of the power and the privilege you have in the spaces that you aim to advocate within. For example, in the IYC space, you hold the power and the privilege to operate, whereas in other spaces, your intersectional identity of being a youth may not yield the power that you possess here and now. Framing all policy instruments in the understanding that an intersectional approach provides that deeper understanding of those most impacted by the decisions, as well as an opportunity to build connections with the allies needed to move a campaign forward. That is key, building those personal connections. We may not all have the same identity, but no human being is uniquely their own identity. And where we intersect is where we cultivate understanding and we grow our collective strength. I want to also acknowledge that it is important to bridge the gap in understanding cross generational communication styles. In other words, know your audience, but don't lose your voice. Your generation uses communication tools differently than I do, but I too often see a disconnect with campaign leadership relying on youth advocates to handle all aspects of the digital tools and social media campaign as an expected function of your youth. And it begs the question, if those in power cannot be bothered to learn a new way of communicating, or whether they cannot be bothered to cultivate a space that engages and encourages everyone's participation. Beyond the motivations, limiting the types of communication to only what you are comfortable with is a way of limiting the discourse, whether it is intentional or not. It forces youth advocates, racial advocates, gender advocates to conform to the standards that have underserved their communities and support the paradigm that those in power will only hear your calls to action if you conform to this very particular standard. I reserve tolerance for this approach only in a very narrow set of high level bureaucratic spaces, and I reject it everywhere else. Understanding the challenges of working in spaces with a multitude of generations and knowing at your core that you have value to add to the strategy, to the implementation discussions, not just value of increasing likes and driving social media traffic, that will serve you in your advocacy. It is equally important to look at the opportunities to learn from intergenerational communication styles, not just because history repeats itself, but because there are lessons to be found in these styles. I mostly create community space with a motto that we don't know everything, but together we do know a lot. And I prefer to engage with youth advocacy campaigns where it is centered in your voice as a way of communicating rather than becoming conformed to fit the needs of others. It is not everyone's agreement on that approach, but I find value and strength from knowing your audience and not losing your voice. Communication styles move beyond just generational gaps, language barriers, and knowing how to engage with others that communicate differently is very much a skill to develop to strengthen your actions and interventions. It's part of demonstrating the importance of holding and controlling youth led power rather than giving it away, which is what I tried to explain in my storytelling of a youth advocate relegated to social media channels rather than strategy. Communication is not just about external expression of self. It also includes learning how to connect and be heard by others, or receptivity. I hope it becomes a skill that you master in your youth led actions, and that this skill can take you and you can teach others how to engage in youth movements as a liaison, bringing them in, but also take that and engage in other intersectional uh, spaces that your identity also provides you power and cultivates your strength. Lastly, I want to take the opportunity um, to really just shape that I hope you come away from my participation in this panel the importance of centering all policy making instruments on youth rather than and youth. So let me explain that. It is not enough for advocates to review existing instruments and have policymakers include your identities, our identities, as an afterthought. That and youth. The framework of the policy should be centered on the intersectional approach and identity that it aims to serve. So this brings me to the public policy instrument that I'm currently engaged with in the Ratify movement, which is seeking US ratification and recognition of the autonomy of the human person through the ratification of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. More than 30 years ago, the Convention on the Rights of the Child posed a profound idea that children are not just objects who belong to their parents, for whom decisions are made, but rather that they are human beings and individuals with their own rights. The Convention asserts that every child has the right to grow up safe in an inclusive environment, to survive, to thrive, to have an equitable chance in life, to learn and to participate. Millions of children continue to suffer violations of their rights when they are denied adequate health care, nutrition, education, protection from violence, or address just transition to the climate crisis. As I close, I want to ask your help in building the storytelling and the narratives for the national campaign to seek U.S. ratification of the Convention of the Rights of the Child. We are the only country who has failed to recognize this fundamental human right. And I cannot achieve this goal without leaning on the support of youth activists just like you and creating and centering the campaign on your perspectives and your voice. So I have a Google form that I've created to help capture some of this information. It is completely voluntary, and I implore you to click on it and to help me create this campaign. Thank you so much for sharing this space with me today and providing me the opportunity to learn from you all, as well as to share some of my experiences in advocating in the local, state, national, and global spaces. Thank you very much, Maria.
Thank you, Ashley, for your intervention. I guess that's Jessica. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear
Okay.
you.
Okay. Couldn't hear. Okay. Couldn't hear. Okay.
Yes, thank you. And Fatiha is beside me. Yes, please. Continue.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you for bringing this topic up, which is a topic of immense significance. Yes, youth play a pivotal part and crucial role in shaping the implementation of public management instruments, and we can demonstrate many examples of that. I'm sure that you're all aware of the extraordinary efforts of Aya Chebi, a young Tunisian activist who has championed the rights of young people across Africa. Being African Union's first ever youth envoy, she's been advocating for youth participation, human rights, and gender equality on a global scale. Aya's story exemplifies how youth can play a pivotal part in upholding public management instruments and promoting gender equality and inclusivity and climate justice on a global stage. As you know, human rights are the bedrock of any just and equitable society, and their integration into public management instruments is essential for upholding a world that upholds these fundamental values. And here we can consider the story of Shahir Niazi, a Pakistani teenage scientist who made headlines after he came up with a revolutionary approach to use artificial intelligence to diagnose diseases. Shahir's innovative work not only showcases the immense potential of youth, but also raises question about the ethical implications of artificial intelligence and technology in healthcare. So this is why I think that the very involvement of us, the youth, in shaping public management instruments is imperative for several reasons. First, we bring fresh ideas and innovative solutions to long-standing challenges. We often challenge the status quo and offer groundbreaking solutions that are deeply rooted in human rights principles. And secondly, we are intimately connected to these issues that will shape our collective future. We understand the necessity and importance of human rights in a rapidly changing world and are motivated to drive meaningful change. So, to get a real life example of this, we can turn our attention to Sonita Alizadeh, an Afghan rapper and singer. Sonita's music is not only a form of self expression, but is also a way for her to raise awareness about child marriage. Through Sonita's music, she has been able to influence policies and practices that have changed Afghan policy on child marriage and also beyond just Afghanistan. Her story illustrates how young individuals can drive change in public management instruments, and particularly those related to gender equality and the rights of women and girls. Now, to respond to your question, right, what steps can we take to harness the power of youth in public management instruments? Well, as a 12-year-old child rights activist and climate campaigner, I would say that first of all, we must create opportunities for young people to actively participate in decision making processes. And this this can be through the development of youth-led advisory committees, councils, or boards in youth-led networks. Just like I run my own organization named Child D, where I work for climate, health, information, learning, and development in partnerships with other cross-border organizations. Second, we should prioritize education and awareness campaigns to empower individuals with the necessary tools and resources that they need to drive meaningful change. We must provide platforms for open, constructive discussions, and we must let youth actually engage with policymakers and community leaders. Just as I am a regular speaker to the United Nations and TEDx and other platforms like this, where I regularly engage with leaders and advocate against global warming and climate change and fossil fuel and carbon emission and other issues like these. And lastly, we should support initiatives that equip young people with the skills and resources needed to drive change. Regular mentorship programs, continuous leadership, and access to funding can empower young people to take an active role in shaping public management instruments. Our voices can drive meaningful change that can eventually lead to the development of a just and sustainable future for all, just as, and we should also encourage youth and recognize their work, just as I was conferred the Human Rights Hero Award at the International uh, Human Rights Youth Summit, 17th International Human Rights Youth Summit. So I would end by saying that our unwavering commitment and our inclusivity and resilience shine brightly in these stories like I just told you. And I think that we should all support young people in this endeavor to fight against climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patia, for your intervention. Back to you, Maria.
Okay, now we have Giulia Toriello, who is the UN delegate to the United Nations. He was the former Italian youth delegate to the United Nations. And so, Giulia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria Sara. Thank you to all of you who are attending in person in New York and virtually this event. It's such a pleasure to attend this outstanding panel and as a conference speaker. But mostly, it's an honor to talk about a pressing issue that concerns us all as the human rights management. When Maria Sara invited me and sent me the draft agenda of the panel, I thought about what my colleagues here were going to say today. I wondered if they were going to be experts on the theme that would have presented concrete solutions based on their experience in the field. And I wondered what my contribution to this conference might have been. So I reflected for weeks before deciding what I was going to say. But then I realized that I had another form of knowledge about human rights and the challenges that the youth face today. And that's because I'm a part of that youth. That's because I see every day my peers who struggle to enter the workplace, access university, and then pay their rent. I hear every day my peers from all over the world who are suffering from the war or recently from the earthquake in Morocco, in Turkey, and Syria, and they don't have an house anymore. I hear from those who don't have a hot meal for weeks, who don't have access to hospitals or basic free healthcare. So you see, that's a different kind of acknowledgement of the struggles that we are facing today. And every time I know that someone my age or even younger can't have their human rights preserved, I acknowledge how much we are failing as a society. And that's why, in a world marked by complexity and change, the voice of young people are an essential asset in the ongoing struggle for the realization of human rights in all corners of society. And as youth, we are often labeled as leaders of tomorrow, but we are, in fact, the leaders of today. Our voices and perspectives are not just valuable, but are indispensable, especially when it comes to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's because the challenges that we face in the 21st century are diverse and complex. from climate change, economic inequality to social justice and political freedoms. And all of these challenges reflect the current underachievement of the Agenda 2030. To address these issues effectively, the youth must engage with all sectors of society and vice versa, harness our energy, creativity, and commitment, and incorporate our perspective into public management instruments. But why it is so imperative to do so? Firstly, because we are disproportionately affected by many of the challenges we face. When we are involved in decision making processes, we ensure that these issues are addressed comprehensively, taking into account the long term consequences for our generation and those who will come after. Secondly, involving youth in public management instruments empowers us to become active citizens and advocates for human rights. By experiencing firsthand the process of governance, we gain a deeper understanding of the complexities and challenges involved. This knowledge will equip us to be informed, engaged, and effective advocates for human rights throughout our lives. But the question of this panel is how can we ensure that the implementation of human rights in public management instruments actively includes the voice of youth? I believe that the first step is guaranteeing education and awareness. This means starting by raising awareness about human rights among young people and ensuring that they understand their rights and the importance of their participation in public management. At a local level, several management concepts and tools are being implemented to embed human rights-based outcome in education, such as rights-based approaches with implementation of educational policies, program rooted in the principle of non-discrimination, participation, accountability, and transparency. Moreover, I believe that it's vital to strategically embed human rights into administrative management procedures by establishing explicit rules and regulations that acknowledge education as a human right. Thus, to ensure the successful application of those policies, teachers, staff, and administrators must be trained on human rights principles. That's what we say when we say educate the educators. To do so is critical to distribute resources to provide equitable access to schools as well as budgetary transparency and monitor and evaluate budget execution to ensure that funds are efficiently used to achieve human rights based education results. And if we aspire to have a keen and respectful society, we have to hold our governments accountable for promoting human rights in their daily work. For example, by upholding the rule of law, ensuring access to justice for human rights violation, and engaging with civil society organizations and human rights institutions for advice and monitoring. In conclusion, the implementation of human rights in public management instruments cannot be fully realized without the active participation of young people. Our voices are not just a valuable addition, they are an essential component of creating a just, inclusive, and sustainable society. By embracing our perspectives, we are not only shaping a better future, but also living up to the principle included into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So, to conclude, let us commit ourselves today to ensuring that every young person's voice is heard, valued, and acted upon. Together, we can build a world where human rights are not just an ideal, but a lived reality for all. Thank you so much again, and congratulations for this panel.
Thank you so much, Julia, for your meaningful intervention. And now it's time for Alexa. Alexa is a woman rights activist. She's a youth delegate for the World Bank, youth delegate ambassador for United to Beat Malaria campaign representing New York. She's also an acrobat, and she made it to combine his politics efforts with this passion, this hobby, this passion actually. So now, Alexa, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name's Alexa. So, as you guys know, I'm a women's rights activist and I'm an artist. And before I was actually in diplomacy and activism, I was my first job, I'm a dancer and I'm a circus performer. And it's I know it's a little bit very unusual for that to be a background. Even if I have a political science and international relations degree, people find it's, very strange in having a circus performer or dancer in the political field. And, what I want to tell people is that I think we should actually normalize having, youth summits and having the field of activism and diplomacy to be accessible for everyone, because in the end of the day, we actually need different perspectives in the table. And I actually want to tell you guys on in growing up in the circus, actually, like, I've been, surrounded by people of different cultures and people of different backgrounds, and it helped me a lot in my career in activism, because I actually get to understand people and I get to understand like where they're coming from, and having that understanding with each other can actually lessen disagreements, and a lot of people don't know that. And that's how, like, I related my artistic background into my diplomacy background. And even like in the, in the arts, in the artistic industry, we have a lot of people experiencing misogyny and racism, and not a lot of people talk about it, because not everybody is in the field of the arts. But when I experienced that actually motivated me to actually speak up about women's rights and to actually be a part of activism. And I actually brought that practice with me into youth summits. I was just in the UNGA weekend when I actually was meeting a lot of activists worldwide. And like, when I was speaking to them, I asked them, like, why do you think the youth are not very involved in politics and in diplomacy? I think it's because, like, the youth, they don't feel connected. They feel intimidated when they talk to officials, or they feel like they need certain requirements to actually participate in youth summits, when in reality you could just apply online. And I think we should actually eliminate that ideology about like how being in politics and diplomacy is so daunting, because at the end of the day, we're all fighting for ourselves. Like, for example, me, I fight for women's rights, and you don't need like a PhD degree to actually be a women's rights activist. You know what I mean? Like, you experience misogyny in a daily basis. And even in our day and age, like, we're in the 21st century, and it's still not normalized to actually have female leaders. When you tell people, I specialize in foreign policy or I specialize in defense, they look at you like it's not a normal thing for a woman to actually do that. And I feel that way all the time. That when people ask what my background is and what my degree is, I say I do security studies and international relations, and they just don't believe it. So, and I think like having that ideology we should eliminate. And then I think like for us to actually eliminate that ideology, we should actually improve communications with one another and to actually make everything accessible to everyone, so that people will actually get educated with with certain things. And and the thing is, like, what's really interesting is because when as I like I grew up dancing, and I grew up like in circus, and I actually learned from my international counterparts on like the importance of like women's rights and what they actually feel in the artistic industry. And like when I'm listening to them, I I brought it with me to youth summits. Like, I not only fought for like women's rights, for myself, but also for my community and for everybody. And I think like, eliminating the idea of actually just having like political science students or international relations students to actually be accepted in the field of diplomacy, I think that we should actually create diversity and actually, inspire the youth to actually say that it's okay to actually voice out your opinions. And also another thing that I actually learned from a lot of people is that the reason why they're afraid of like, voicing out their opinions because like they're very scared of like what society thinks of them, especially in our generation right now. We're so like, we care a lot about our image. We want to like look cool, or we want to look, we want to be normal like all of our friends. But and then we forget, like, when we say I want to fight for climate change, or if I want to fight for women's rights, people look at you like, oh, that's so intense. Like, it's why would you want to fight for human rights, or why do you want to fight for climate change and just be like everybody else? I think we should actually eliminate the ideology of having a lot of people wanting to be the same as everybody. Because the thing is, like, if you want to be like a successful activist, or if you want to be a successful leader, then you have to be the change maker. And I always tell that to people and to the people I advocate, that you shouldn't you shouldn't be afraid to actually voice out your opinions, and you shouldn't be afraid to actually speak up for yourself. And the thing is, like, I learned a lot of these things when I attended youth summits, that it's actually okay to speak to officials, and it's actually okay to advocate about these things. But the thing is, like, the people who don't have access to these youth summits, they don't know that it's okay to actually speak up. So I think like we should actually, fund more organizations, and we should actually make everything accessible to everybody, because everyone can be a leader. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your background is. If you're passionate about creating a change, then I think leadership and politics is for you. And that's what I want to bring to my message out there as an activist, that activism, diplomacy, politics, and the UN and being leader is accessible to everybody, no matter who you are. So yeah.
Okay. It has been really interesting. Wow. It has been really interesting how see you combine this passion that is really unusual actually in the field, as you said, but at the same moment, it is really enriching between one another. The two fields, they actually feed themselves to one another at the same time. So thank you for your intervention, you as well. And now we have Andres Teixeira, sorry for the pronunciation, as always. He's the president at CNED, National Council of Law Students in Portugal. And so now the floor is yours.
Thank you. Don't worry about the pronunciation, that happens. And greetings from Portugal. First of all, I would like to thank you all for being here. Thank the team of the International Youth Conference, especially, of course, Maria Sara, which is a great example of what we're talking here today. And what are we effectively talking here today? We're talking here about young and active citizens, knowledgeable of their rights and provided with the actual tools to make use of them. These citizens can actually make a difference, and that's what we've been talking and what I want to share a bit more with you today. So talking quickly about human rights. Human rights of the various generations do not exist successively, but cumulatively. One may think that human rights relating to the individual freedoms would be guaranteed in the current system, at least in countries with a stronger and richer democracies. There is still a widespread and lingering suspicion, which I share, that there is an emerging conservatism that calls into question the rights of not only women and minorities, but also immigrants and economically ill-fated people from all around, which are incredibly human subjects without first-generation civil and political rights. So we must make no mistake, and I don't want to sound dire here, but it is true, first-generation human rights, the most basic ones, are not guaranteed, even in relatively rich or stable countries. So inequality is in fact greater today than in the 50s or in the 60s, and is the biggest threat to democratic social balance, because people, and young people specifically, feel that they have given up control over their lives and they do not have a say in effective matters. Now, third-generation human rights, which are essentially guided by the ideal of fraternity and solidarity, like environmental rights, true communication, self-determination, respect for national sovereignty, etc., are obviously in danger in this context. Like many have said, and this is a commonplace thing to say, I know, but well, it has to be said, education is the silver bullet, right? Since these are the rights that youth's voice in particular has and can continue to be central to evolution and development. So let's talk a bit about law and realpolitik. There are several instruments and practices that can be used by young people to enhance and defend these rights in their personal fields of action. Not everybody is different. Not everybody is equal, apologies. And we all have different fields of action, different opportunities. So we must try to use them in different ways. Funding is, of course, a major issue in all youth politics, because the youth issue is unfortunately treated as an afterthought in many places. This may be changed to major changes due to demographic representing an inevitable change in voting blocks. But there are still difficulties in youth and young people accessing government bodies and influencing, therefore, public law and public practices. So policy pressure and advocacy to change this is, of course, the main course of action. And this can be done in many ways. I will not explore those that my colleagues already have. But there are some practices that, while they exist in some countries, they don't exist in others. So we can explore some of them to help and empower these youths to do whatever they wish in their local communities, either at the local, national, or even international levels. But let's talk, first of all, at municipal levels. There are various kinds of structures that, if they do not exist, they should be created. If they do exist, they should be encouraged to have participation, like municipal youth councils that can help young people to directly address mayors, municipal institutions, and similar stakeholders. This is essential, these kinds of local institutions, to influence local policy, and more importantly, which is normally the main issue, to put them directly in contact with local leaders. Of course, at national and international levels, there are associations directed at specific issues or of areas of action, which are effectively essential and have produced great results in areas like, for example, climate change, which we have seen has an effect cooperation among many countries and many kinds of institutions. But that's not the only thing that we can actually impact and change. There are numerous proposals that can and should be explored through youth movements, such as quotas for young people on low and medium incomes for the licensing of private housing, or ensuring market access for those who want to enter their fields, whatever they may be, through paid, dignified internships, which is something that, while it is already been explored in the European field, it's still very much something that is behind of the times. I know the way that people should be paid is still very much something shocking. But in essence, we must defend and allow for the participation of people from different creeds and origins and backgrounds in mainstream and non-mainstream political platforms. And I use this in a non-partisan kind of way. To find access directly to these capabilities. While it may be difficult sometimes to mobilize a generation that sometimes feels disenfranchised, and rightly so, from public intervention, we must therefore strive and focus on removing these barriers through education and active empowerment. We are all political actors, whatever and wherever we may be. And politics is a beautiful thing, a beautiful word, even if sometimes people like to there are a lot of examples of bad politics, but if we treat politics as something bad inherently, and again, I use politics in the sense that we are trying to influence what goes around, how our societies progresses, then if we treat politics as something bad, as something that we should not be involved in because it's ugly, because it's tough, well, that truly is the death of the whole thing. So all citizens should actively engage in political processes, whatever they may be, because democracy can only work when all citizens impact and engage with this. Just to finish, because I don't want to, I know I speak too much, but I sometimes like to speak too much about these kinds of things. But let's talk about the justice system real quick, because I am very much involved in that side of things. So one of the major things when it comes to the justice systems all worldwide that we must strive to achieve is to allow young people and their representative institutions, associations, groups, whatever, facilitated access to courts and their environment and licensing committees, groups, etc., which decide on these generational policies. Several countries do not put legal fees in place for these kinds of groups. Some do. But there are still significant barriers in the access to justice systems. While the effectiveness of the justice systems themselves is clearly an issue, I will not go into that. Access to justice is an effective hurdle to the usage of courts to create change. And this can be an effective tool to improve public management systems. As an example, quick one. A group of Portuguese, I know, I have to, of Portuguese youths are suing my country and 32 others in the European Court of Human Rights for breaking the generational duty to young people by not implementing adequate climate change policies, which created a fire in their local hometown, a very small village in the north of my country. This will, however, be a major case that may have direct policy implications in the decisions of the European governments, and as such, a direct influence on the fight against climate change. While I am not saying that all of you should sue your own governments, I want you all to be able to do it if the need arises, and you feel that this is the best option to create change. This is what the international legal system is about, and that's why we should defend it in any way, shape, or form, creating a rules-based environment where everyone, including children as young as 15 in my example, can have a positive impact. That said, Alongside that, the insurmountable and necessary defense of representative democracy, local democratic institutions can and should, especially through schools and universities, train and confront the opinions of young students, which should have permanent listening bodies. And in some cases, decision-making institutional listening bodies with special attention to the dangers of the simulated logics of participation, which sometimes falsify and instrumentalize the interests of young people in the name of a kind of youth washing process of decision validation for some institutions or political leaders. So, in essence, there is much that young people can do if given the opportunity, but opportunity is not something that always presents itself in a silver platter, especially in the current climate of doubt and uncertainty about our democratic rules-based system. Current leaders have not done enough, and it shall be left to us. So we must dare to see our societies now not how they are, but how they should be. We do need a new generation of leaders capable of facing a new generation of challenges, but such a transition clearly does not come easily or painlessly. So we must seek it and enforce it however we can. So please do not and never doubt. I'm going to use one of those sentences that, well, most people should know, but I like it a lot, so I have to. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world, because indeed it is the only thing that ever has. So thank you very much, and I'm open to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for this insight from a lawyer's perspective. And now it's time for Federico Maria Terreni. He's a policy and advocacy manager and at European Movement International. So the floor is yours, Federico.
Yes, thanks a lot, Sarah. And thank you very much for the opportunity. It's really lovely to be here. And I've heard a lot of very insightful comments. I have to be honest, as the last speaker, I'm very happy to observe and admit that I don't really have much to add, because I believe that the most important relevant points have been said. And it's actually very good, don't get me wrong. So before adding a few things, also mindful of the time, and also to give an opportunity for the people that are actually taking the time and the patience to listen to us, to interact, because I think it's also interesting to see what other people have to say and the questions. A brief introduction about who I represent, the stuff that I do. So the European Movement International is actually the oldest and largest pan-European network of pro-European organizations, established 75 years ago in 1948 during the Congress of Europe by Churchill, ironically enough, someone that come from the UK, with the ambition to promote peace, democracy, and fundamental rights. The European movement was essentially the organization that contributed to the establishment of the Council of Europe in 1949, as well as the Collège d'Europe in 1949. And ever since, we've been very active in Brussels and all over Europe, promoting European integration and fostering the process of integration among member states. I'm based in Brussels. The organization I represent for is based in Brussels. We congregate the interests and the ambitions, the demands, the recommendations of a variety of stakeholders, ranging from political parties to NGOs, civil society organizations, the academia, social partners, trade unions, so a very diverse and broad range of actors, and which makes the work actually quite interesting. Sometimes I have to say conflicting, because it's, you need to find common ground. And building on this conversation, I've heard a lot of very interesting points. I'll try to maybe add a few points. I very much liked, for example, what André said. I really enjoyed that he mentioned participatory democracy, because I think it's a key element, and it's also a huge portion of the work that we do, because I very much believe that when we talk about policy and when we talk about implementing human rights, but also in general policy in public management, we believe, and we've also seen with research, that bottom-up approaches that involve citizens, starting from the youth, of course, in the decision-making process, in deliberative democracy, in all these participatory tools that the European Commission, to be more precise, but also other institutions have been developing and trying and testing, actually, in the last years, great results can be achieved. The best example in this conversation can be the Conference on the Future of Europe, which was essentially a unique exercise in which I was lucky enough to take part in which essentially people from all walks of life, from all over Europe, were put together, knowing absolutely nothing about Europe, nothing about the European Union, about the complex structure of the European Union, and all its institutions. They were all put together in a room with policymakers and civil society representatives to take stock of what Europe, what the European Union is and has been done, and what's next. They came up with an impressive set of recommendations that are actually part of the European Commission's work program. It's been part of the deliverables that the Commission has pledged to carry out. And this has a lot to do, of course, with human rights and all sorts of rights that have been mentioned already in this conversation, because when we talk about human rights, we need to talk about, of course, also social rights, workers' rights, minority rights, digital rights, of course. Someone also mentioned housing. I think it's a great example. And when I think about human rights implementation and also public management, I also need to make a connection with democracy, because I have the feeling, I think, that for too long we've taken democracy for granted, which, as we can see, it has been a great mistake, because all of a sudden we've realized, speaking from a European perspective, that democracy isn't really something that we take for granted, because we woke up one day and realized that war was back in Europe. We realized that fully fledged member states of the European Union have become full autocracies, if not authoritarian states, that essentially are challenging, if not actually trying to dismantle fundamental rights and the way the democratic function of the European Union should be. We're also realizing that, I don't know who it was, but someone also made a great example of migration and asylum policy, that in a continent, in a structure in which they've been claiming to be champions for human rights and integration and solidarity, when we talk about migration and asylum policy, the European Union has failed. I guess everybody has heard or at least followed what's going on in Lampedusa, in Southern Italy. It's absolutely despicable to see it, what's happening, or the fact that in Lesbos, essentially the Greek government has built concentration camps because there's no other word to define what's happening in some Greek islands. And so what I'm trying to say, building on what has already been said, is that definitely there's an urgent need to mainstream human rights and human rights standards at all levels of policymaking, from local to national to European level and beyond, of course. With a very important element, which is the necessary and again urgent need to include youth. Because I think it was Julia that said that we are the leaders of today. It's absolutely true. I couldn't agree more, but the leaders of today need leadership. They actually need a leading role, which is something that in so many cases is missing. Think about the composition of the European Parliament, which is one of the most diverse institutions in the world. And it's actually shocking to see how diverse it's not, actually, especially when you think about the youth component. Recently, I think the European Youth Forum said that there are more people named Martins than people under 30 or 40, something absolutely incredible. Why am I saying that? Because there's indeed a need to take action and be active. And maybe I can give three examples that have already been said. So apologies if I'm repeating myself, but I think it's actually nice to see that we are on the same page. So firstly, include the youth, but also youth and young candidates in political lists when we talk about elections. We need to put names, we need specific quotas, and we don't want young names as the third or fourth or fifth name, number one or number two. Secondly, there has been some improvement in the lowering of the voting age. Now, 5 member states of the European Union have lowered the voting age from 18 to 16. It's excellent news. Germany, Austria, Malta, Belgium, and Greece. More needs to be done. Young people have shown that they want to be involved, they need to be involved. Then, young people, young organizations, young and youth NGOs, civil society organizations, they need resources to carry out their work. And when I mean resources, I mean essentially financial resources. Andrea mentioned that, and I couldn't agree more. And when I talk about resources, I talk about long-term budgets, solid programs without unnecessary bureaucracy, and really, really strong, impactful programs that have an impact directly in policymaking. And then to conclude, I also believe that maybe something that was missing in this conversation is the word accountability, because I also want to believe that and to hope that in a situation in which there's so much work to do, a lot has been done, but a lot must be done, the leadership that is in charge needs to be held accountable for their mistakes, for their misbehavior, and all sorts of activities essentially don't help in this conversation. So I mean, I will stop here. Thanks again, really lovely conversation, and let's give space also to the audience to engage with us. Thanks again.
Thank you, Federico, for your intervention and reflections. And I think that now it's time for Jessica to engage with the audience there on site.
Yes, thank you so much. I want to thank all the speakers for your wonderful intervention. Fatiha, she left early for another program, but I would like to thank her for her intervention as well. And now I would like to give some summary points to all the speakers' interventions. Ashley, thank you for including storytelling to highlight the importance of narration that seek to include that intersectional approach to human rights issues. Bridging the understanding of cross-generational communication styles, that's also a topic of your intervention. Understanding your audience, but do not lose your voice, especially for youth to find a space. Demonstrate the importance of holding and controlling youth-led power rather than giving it away. Centering policy-making instruments on youth rather than and youth. Autonomy of the human person and Convention on the Rights of the Child. Request from audience to shape priorities and youth-led interventions for the U.S. ratification of the rights of the child and joining the Ratify Movement campaign to lead this action. Those are important points of your intervention, and I would like to thank you for that. And Fatia, who had to leave early for another program, she highlighted inspirational figures and how they have influenced public management instruments. And she also highlighted the question, why must youth be involved in shaping public management instruments? Julia, thank you so much for reflecting upon being a youth and why youth involvement is crucial, and also answering the question, why must youth engage with all the sectors of society and vice versa, harnessing our energy, creativity, and commitment, and incorporating our perspectives into public management instruments. Alexa, female representation and women's rights in diplomacy and activism are important. And using storytelling to underscore the importance of diversity, mental health, youth involvement, and equality. This is also very important and crucial in how youth is we are able to find a space in the dialogue and conducting dialogues, and also trying to help us find the meaningful actions to promote the Sustainable Development Goals, to promote human rights, to understanding human rights, and to learning about human rights. And Andre, thank you so much for highlighting the different levels of human rights and also highlighting that education is the right and it is central to human rights. Municipal institutions, international levels, they need to have the essentiality to ensure access and use policy to influence justice systems, generational policies. Those are really important, crucial points that we need to have in society. And lastly, I would like to thank Federico for highlighting the question, how can human rights be taught, understood, enjoyed, and put in place at different levels with intersectoral and intersectional approaches? What resources and attention are needed to respect human rights at different levels? Thank you so much to all the speakers. And now I would like to turn to our in-person attendees to see if you have any questions for the speakers. We can take one question from the floor today. Yes, please, ma'am.
Would you like me to start?
Yes, please.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this panel. It was really wonderful. And my name is Danielle Obisi-Orlu. I am a PhD student at Cornell. But I'm also a poet and a social impact activist, and there are lots of things. So my question is directed towards Alexa. I think it was really wonderful how you paired your creative aspect, your artisanal aspect with your engagement with policy. I study, I'm a PhD student studying international relations, and I look at migration and development and peace building. And then people are also surprised to hear that oh, you're also a poet and a storyteller, and they don't think those two things connect. However, they're surprised when I tell them the most diplomacy, human rights work that I've done has been through that creative aspect. So my question for you is, I've partnered with many organizations and they're always like, oh my gosh, we wanted a poet and you gave us so much more, but we wanted an artist of some kind. How do we get young people, or how do we get organizations involved in utilizing the creativity of young people to advocate for human rights and change and peace building? Because when we hear World Bank, when we hear UNICEF, when we hear IOM, when we hear, UN to some extent, we think policy, policy, policy. However, that creativity aspect is a form of access. That's what makes these organizations accessible to youth who are saying, well, I'm interested in music. I don't really think that the World Bank is interested in what I'm interested in. How do we get organizations to understand that creativity is a force for peace building? And how do we bridge that gap? Thank you.
Um,
Question.
so
So
the thing
the
is,
thing is,
what I do is I actually use social media to actually, advocate about the importance of human rights. And the thing is with the World Bank, what I did there was I actually represented the NGO I'm a part of, Hallmark, and I actually advocated a lot about gender equality. And the thing is like what you said earlier, that it's very unusual that an artist is actually in this field. It's very hard to actually have organizations agree to actually partner up with artists to do activism. The thing is, what I actually do, like, since it's not normalized yet, it's a very unusual thing. What I actually say, so these things that we experience, like climate change, like human rights and women's empowerment and diversity, we actually experience it ourselves as human beings, not just like artists. You know what I mean? Like as a human being, like we experience what it feels like to feel misogyny, and we experience, climate change and the change of and the damages in our society. And the thing is, like, what I actually tell organizations is that we shouldn't actually just look at artists as someone just performing on stage and someone just entertaining people, but we're actually human beings as well. We're actually citizens of this country and this world. And the thing is, like, what people don't realize is that as artists, we're also very outspoken. We're also very, we actually know a lot about these things. And I would say, like, for to actually increase advocacy and to actually convince people that we should actually participate in activism is to improve social media, to talk about it on social media, to actually improve communications, and to actually talk to people within your own community and actually inspire them about the importance of actually participating in these youth summits. And the thing is, like, we of course, like, the World Bank, and I was also in the NATO Youth Summit. It's all policy, but then the thing is, like, what people don't realize is that once you're actually involved in, policy advising, and once you're actually involved in activism and, and voicing out about these things, is you're creating a change in your own little way. It's obviously not going to happen overnight, but just being present and just being educated about, all of these things can actually improve, like, your own understanding when it comes to human rights. And it also can improve your advocacy. So in that way, when you go back home, then you can bring those things that you learn from these summits. And that's what I would tell organizations on, like, why, like, we need everything to be accessible to everybody, no matter who you are, artist or whatever your career is. Because, like, we get to learn from these things, and we actually get to participate in policymaking to actually make our world a better place. And so that's, like, what I do. That's how I tell organizations on, like, why we need more people from different backgrounds in the forum. I
Thank
hope
you,
that
Alexa. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Alexa, and thank you to the participant. And here, looking at the commentaries online, we have received gratification from the online participants for all your intervention. Thank you so much. And yet, we do not see a question coming online. As such, I will pass the floor to Maria. Maria, can you please conclude the session?
Well,
Well,
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank each of you for your meaningful and really boots on the ground, experience-based point of view. Starting from your reflections and approaching the conclusion of the panel, the last thing that I want to say to the huge audience that is following us online and on site in New York, among which there are those institutional personalities who are closely related to the environment, actually, where concrete decisions affecting our lives are taken on a daily basis. So, is that we all have to keep in mind that human rights standards and principles are applicable to all public authorities' work and to the working environments of each of us, actually, without exception. So we have also to keep in mind that the application of human rights-based management tools and approaches can help to make human rights an everyday management practice. And at the same time, improving also improve the delivery and the quality of public service. So, as last but not the least, human rights-based management tools can also help to measure the progress towards the realization of human rights, and thereby make it more visible. And this is, I think, that it is effectively possible only if everyone does his her own share, and if everyone plays the role she got. So I think that I would like to end this session with the concept of good governance according to the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. It is the process whereby, and I quote, public institutions conduct public affairs, manage public resources, and guarantee the realization of human rights. And here, the most important part, I quote again, the true test of good governance is the degree to which it delivers on the promise of human rights. So, to sum up, every public choice has to be connected with a guiding line that is strictly related to human rights, even because 2030 is getting closer and closer, and we have to be more ready than now by that time. So thank you everyone for your engaging participation, and I think we could end here.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you so much, all the speakers and participants joining us online and in person. We can conclude this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.